morning is my husband, Richard Randolph. Richard has a Master's of Divinity degree, and he also has a PhD in, well, no, he added something to it this morning. I was going to say philosophical and religious ethics from the Graduate Theological Union and the University of California, Berkeley. He has taught divinity students and medical students ethics and cultural competency, and teaching cultural competency and ethics to medical students driven back to religion. And he is currently the senior pastor at Christ United Methodist Church in Lincoln. So, Richard.
Well, thank you all for having me today. I have a new toy. Let's see if I can do this.
I don't think you get to take it home.
Oh, I need to turn it on, sorry. There we go. Well, again, my name is Richard Randolph, and Laverne and I have been married for a very long time. Was it 33 years. I've been waiting for Laverne to introduce me in a setting like this, our married life together, and so I'd like to just tell you what she left out. We have two children. We have a son whose name is Justice. He lives in Washington, D.C., and a daughter whose name is Eden, and she's better be graduating from K-State this spring. That's and so I'm happy to be here. I hope that what I can do can be of some help to you. What I'd like to do is to focus on just sort of three objectives for this presentation. And the first thing I'd like to do is begin with just sort of a review of basic clinical ethics, and then move into a discussion of spiritual and cultural competency and how that plays out in providing health care. And then when I've done these presentations before, a lot of times practitioners bring questions or concerns from their practice that they would like to talk about or share, and so I'm hoping to leave a lot of time for you to just raise questions or concerns or to just interact with me. And if you don't have any questions or concerns, then maybe we'll get lunch early, I don't know. Does that seem like a good way to proceed? And I understand I have till about noon or so okay. So this is going to be a lot easier for me if we interact a lot, okay? So I don't want to just stand up and just lecture. I have some slides that I want to talk about, but it's really important that we interact, so feel free to interrupt me or raise a point or ask a question, and particularly if I'm not clear about anything, please stop me. And we'll try to clarify things. I've given you two sets of documents. The first is just sort of a printout of the slides that I'm going to show you, and then the other are some case studies that I'm hoping that we can do during the course of the morning. So let me begin by just talking about the standard bioethical model for the practice of medicine in the United States. The standard model was really developed and popularized by two individuals, Beecham and Childress, and it contains four principles or four core concerns for the practice of medicine. The first of the principles is to respect the patient's autonomy. Can everybody hear me okay? The second is to is non-maleficence, or to do no harm. And the third is beneficence, and then the fourth is justice. So this is a set of 4 principles that have been developed and worked out over the last 20 or 30 years. I want to talk about each of those in a bit of detail. This is the reference to, I have up here the 5th edition. I'm sure there's like a 7th or 8th edition at this point in time. They keep updating their book. But to talk about, first of all, just respect for patients' autonomy. In our society and in our culture, respecting the patient's autonomy is very, very important. It began to emerge in the late 1950s when we began to recognize how important it was that people actually have the opportunity to have control and decision-making power and autonomy over what's happening to their bodies. It's sort of fundamental to who we are as a culture. Individual freedom, the right to be able to have a say-so over what happens in our lives. It's something that we really value a great deal in this culture. And so patient autonomy is really a fundamental principle. Now, what that means is a couple of things. Sort of the criteria in terms of what counts as patient autonomy. To respect the patient's autonomy, we need, as practitioners, we need to have a couple of different things that we do, a couple of criteria, if you will, that we need to meet. The first is there needs to be full disclosure. So full disclosure means that in working with the patient needs to have full disclosure of what's going on. You know, there was a time in our culture, and there are other cultures even today, where if someone is really sick, if someone has terminal cancer, then we don't tell the patient because we don't want to disturb them. So then the patient just goes along and never really knows until the very end that they've been terminally ill. We did that at one point in time in our culture, but now what we do is recognize that it's important for patients to have full disclosure about what's going on with their bodies. If you're terminally ill, the reasoning is you need to understand your condition and sort of your life expectancy so that you can manage that time and use that time in the best possible way. So perhaps you have a bucket list and you've always wanted to go zip lining, and so maybe that's something that you want to do, or maybe you need to get your affairs in order or have a relationship that you sort of have closure with. In the church that I serve, we have a family, a grandmother and a son, and the father is in Alaska, and he's terminally ill with pancreatic cancer. And so one of the things that when he found out how ill he was, the first thing he did was he called all of his family in Nebraska and Texas. And he said, I want us all to come together. I want you all to come up here for one last time for us just to be together so that we can have some closure before I get too ill. So that's part of what full disclosure means. The other thing about full disclosure is that the patient should have the opportunity to know what all of the options are in terms of how to treat them. And so they need to have all of the different options, whether they're options that are recommended or preferred or not by the practitioners. Sometimes cancer is another good example. Sometimes patients want to be very aggressive and use all of the available means to battle the cancer. They want to use chemotherapy or whatever's available. And then other patients say, I just don't want to go through that. I just want to be able to have this time and be in as little pain as possible. So that's what full disclosure means. The second thing is there needs to be sufficient comprehension. So when a practitioner is working with a patient and the patient's family, it's important that the information is conveyed to them, not in a technical term that you would use, among other, say here in this group, but that the information is conveyed in a way that they fully comprehend and understand what you're saying to them as a practitioner. This makes it really hard if the patient doesn't have English as their first language, or if there are other problems. But to respect the patient's autonomy, the patient has to have sufficient comprehension of what's going on. Okay. And then the third criterion is voluntariness, which means that whatever course of action the patient wants to pursue, they need to, that really needs to be what they want to do, that individual patient. Sometimes we'll see situations where the family may be pressuring the patient to choose a particular course of action, or a patient may try to choose the thing that they think that the doctor wants them to choose, or that a nurse or someone else that's working with them wants them to choose. And but full voluntariness means that the patient actually chooses what's in their heart, that they feel like is best for their body, that they are able to stand up against pressure from family members sometimes who have the best interest at heart for the patient, but maybe have other things going on and the patient really wants to do something else. So again, with cancer, the example would be children who really want the patient to live as long as they can, and so they're really pushing an aggressive treatment of the cancer, and the patient is more like, I don't want to do that. What I want to do is just have the time that I have to be high quality, pain-free. And so that would be an example of a conflict of voluntariness. Does that make sense? Are you with me so far? Okay. Then the last criterion is mental competence. The patient has to be mentally competent. Okay. And so some of the standard competence questions are: what's your name? Where are you? What year is it? Etc. But the patient not only has to be able to comprehend what's going on, they not only have to make their own decision, but of course, before any of that can happen, they have to be mentally competent. So what do we do if a patient is not mentally competent? Guardian, right. Right? Do they have a power of attorney? Do they have some sort of surrogate healthcare decision maker, or a form that they filled out? Or then what if none of that exists? And how do you determine what to do as a patient?
Call your emergency contact.
Okay. Yeah.
Because you have to list somebody.
Or you default, if you don't have any of those options, you default to what would be standard practice of care, right? I mean, you just sort of what you would normally do. Okay, so that's the first principle, that's respect to patient autonomy. And then the second is non-maleficence, do no harm. So the definition of harm is understood as, in a non-normative sense, is just thwarting, defeating, or setting back some party's interests. So I think harm is pretty self-evident, right? We understand what harm is in the medical context. It's sort of important to note that many procedures that we do in a clinic or in medicine, actually, they involve some harm. Surgery is a classic example. You harm the patient by cutting the patient in order to perform a greater good. When I was a child, I was very clear that the doctor harmed me because it seemed like every time I went in, I was getting some sort of childhood vaccination. So a needle in my arm, I consider harm, but it's for a greater good. And so that brings me to the third principle, which is beneficence, which is doing good. Beneficence means just doing an action that you're going to do to benefit others, in this case the patient. So I get my flu vaccination, usually, every fall, and I have the harm of the needle and the soreness in my arm. But we do that because of the greater good of protecting myself from, the flu virus during the flu season. If you look at different ethical systems around the world, so for example, if you look at Buddhist ethics or Islamic ethics, certainly Christian ethics, a lot of philosophical ethics, these two principles of first, do no harm, and secondly, do good, try to help the person, are sort of fundamental to many, many different ethical systems. And there's a lot of common sense to that. I think you don't want to harm someone, but you do want to do beneficence. So then the third or fourth principle is just justice. That's the fair sharing of benefits and burdens. A lot of times this fourth principle comes into play more in terms of healthcare policy rather than in the clinical setting. We've been having this long debate about healthcare in our country and about what's a fair distribution of the benefits of healthcare. And so Washington last week, that was at the front of the discussion, a lot of debate about the new healthcare proposal, which was eventually withdrawn by the President and the Speaker of the House. But that would come under justice, those types of discussions. How are we doing? Is this helpful or making sense? And do you feel like you maybe learned something? Okay, good. Because I have another. I put this slide in this morning. This is called a farm box, and it was a friend of mine, Dr. Terry Roselle, developed this. He specialized in a lot in clinical ethics, and so he came up with this mnemonic. We'll do a number of mnemonics during the course of this morning, but it's just sort of a way to sort of remember some things about how to treat patients ethically as you're dealing with patients, sort of, as you're going from patient to patient, or you're seeing them in your clinic. And so the mnemonic is farm, so F-A-R-M. And so the idea here for farm is to, first of all, to find out what are the facts. So medically, what are the facts that are present with this particular patient? Okay, they're just sort of the medical facts. And then what are the social and psychosocial issues that are going on for the patient? What's going on in terms of how they're feeling psychologically, how things are going, with their family, what you're learning about the patient. I'm not sure why you put politically in there, but certainly financially right now, a lot of patients, are really concerned about how much is this going to cost me. I have several parishioners in my church who told me I'm not going to the doctors much this year because I'm just concerned about my cost. And so that's become a real issue that I think we obviously need to address as a society. So the A stands for assumptions, and that the assumptions refers to beliefs, hopes, intuitions, outcomes, and consequences in two ways. First of all, what are the assumptions that the patient is making about what's wrong with them and what the medical practitioners can do to help them. Okay? My doctor knows that when I come in to see her, I'm going to basically sit down and say, here's what's wrong with me. What's the magic pill that you need to prescribe for me, so I can go on about my life. I always just want her to just give me some sort of drug so I can keep going, and so sometimes she has to say, well, Richard, We need to slow down here. There is no drug in this case, you just have to tough this out. Or I want to do some tests before I actually make a decision. But my assumption is that when I go to see my doctor, she's going to make me well. Because she always has in the past. She has never, ever let me down. So there are the assumptions that the patient has. There are the intuitions that the patient has. I went to see my doctor a while ago, and I was having pain in my back. And I'm like, this seems really weird, and I'm not sure I can account for it. And, I told her, is this like maybe the beginnings of some form of cancer? I was really worried about it. So it turns out that it wasn't. The pain went away when I got a new chair, office chair for my desk, and got rid of the old one and got one that really, fit my back. So those are the type of assumptions or intuitions that patients carry in. And then there are assumptions and intuitions that the provider, the healthcare provider, whether it's a nurse or a doctor or anyone, brings to that particular situation. And you need to be aware of what are the assumptions that you're making, particularly when it comes to religious and cultural differences. Responsibilities refers to just who is responsible and for what. Okay. Yes?
I have a question on assumptions. Is that just going to be an intuition that people have to have, or do you ask these questions? How do you know what their beliefs, hopes, how do you get there?
Okay. A short answer is, to ask questions. Usually we come in and we sort of have a social understanding of what happens in the examination room, and you don't really need to go into those assumptions and things. But sometimes you just need to ask, well, what do you think, or what are you feeling? Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's just kind of like what do sometimes there's a cultural problem there also, the language skills and a few other things. So how to get there, I think sometimes it's difficult.
Okay.
Knowing that assumption box, I think is
right. So this thing is just trying to tease out all of the things that go into providing ethical medical care. And so it's not like, don't think of it as a recipe for step 1, 2, 3. Well, think about it as more, these are things that we sort of need to be aware of on a general level. What are the facts? What are the assumptions that I have coming into this patient? What are the assumptions that the patient may have about what's going to happen? What are the responsibilities? And then finally, what are the morals? That is, what are my moral obligations in this particular case as a practitioner? I'm going to give you a number of mnemonics during the course of this morning, and one thing to understand about these is they're just handy mental ways to keep things in mind when you're going about practicing medicine. But you shouldn't think of them as sort of recipes where it's just 1, 2, 3, 4. But the farm I like farms, so it's an easy one for me to remember. Well, what are the facts here? What are the assumptions? What's responsible, and what's the moral issue? That makes sense. Okay. Other questions? We're all on the same page? Okay, well, let's find out. I want you to, in the tables here, read the first case study, which is called When the Patient Isn't Logical. And just a little bit of background. I served on some hospital ethics committees over the course of my time, and so this is a case that we encountered on one of the ethics committees that I served on. So what I want you to do is to read the case study and then talk by the tables, so each of the tables, and then when I sort of discern that we've worked through the case, then I'll bring us all back together as a group, and then we'll just see what different tables, how we resolve this case. Are you with me? Sort of pick a spokesperson. And you've got 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Everybody got a spokesperson? The way to do this is everybody just point at one person.
So you soon, but you should try to bring in family.
Okay, I want to go back to my previous slide here. Let's just use this case study, and let's just sort of see how this farm will actually work, okay, in a situation. So, what are the facts from the case study? He's non-compliant, okay. What else? Just, he's very poor. Okay.
Alcohol abuse.
I'm sorry?
Alcohol abuse.
Alcohol abuse and drug abuse. What else?
Doesn't seem like there's family or friends with him.
Right, he's a loner. We're leaving out the most important facts. This guy has an infection. And it's really out of control. And it's spreading. Right? What are the assumptions? What are the assumptions of the patient, Mr. Boulders?
That it's worked in the past, antibiotics are gonna work again.
Exactly. It'll just work. It's sort of like when Richard goes to his doctor, you know, just give me the magic medicine and I know that I'll get better. What are the assumptions of caregivers? Well, that's sort of a fact that he's going to die without an intervention. But what's the assumption of
Better to
it?
take the leg off than to die. That's an assumption of the
Right. Okay, so if this were your patient, what would be your assumptions?
We're kind of assuming that he's competent.
Right. Okay. So you're assuming that he's competent. That's very important. But aren't you assuming that you need to help him and you need to save his life? So that's working behind. That's sort of driving what you're thinking, right? This is what was driving this ethics committee. You know, we want to save this guy's life. We just don't want him to die. I think he's 59. Okay. And so what are the responsibilities? Who's responsible here? You're responsible for the information. Is that correct? Give him the information.
Probably giving the resources if he does want to proceed, you know, rather than, I mean, need to give him all his options.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Exactly. You're responsible for, on that principle of autonomy, making sure you get full disclosure of what's going on and all of his options. Okay. Any other responsibilities? He's responsible, right? He's the patient, he's responsible, it's his body. He has the final say. So then that moves us to the the morals. So I just want to go around and see how each table sort of ended the discussion, and if you had a resolution. I'm going to start over here. I think you had a consensus of what you were doing. Who's your spokesperson? Please stand up.
Well, yeah, we mentioned that we wanted to see, you know, we assumed that he was competent, maybe look into that a little bit more. Delve deeper in if he has family or a power of attorney, that kind of thing. See if there are things that are holding him back. If he knows he does go through amputation, how's he going to be cared for? Where is he going to be cared for? Does he have to go to a skilled facility, which maybe he is one of those people that are never going to go there? Or religious beliefs, monetary, might be holding him back. If you just given all the options and covered all those bases.
Right.
Um,
That's really good. That's sort of full disclosure. You know, you're just really meeting all those criteria on autonomy.
but ultimately, it's his decision.
So then you'd let him just sort of stay there in the bed and the infection keeps going and you try to treat it as best you can, but you know that ultimately he's going to just succumb.
As long as he knows what's lies ahead. Yeah.
Right. Great, thank you. Gold star for your table. Let's go here. Who's the spokesperson? Please stand up.
We talked about getting social services involved, stay with them, find out if he has family or a power of attorney. And, try to involve the social service consult along with the doctor or surgeon, because some people are just black and white. You just have to put it out there, blunt and, let him know that if you don't treat this or have your leg amputated, you're gonna die.
Right.
Plain and simple.
Right.
Some people just need to hear that, straightforward. Also talk about, if he did go through with the surgery, talk about getting him set up with home health, if that was something that's holding him back. Same with getting family involved, and if he doesn't want to do the surgery, involve palliative care, hospice, in the home or in a facility or whatever his choice.
Okay. Very good, thank you. Your gold star table. I'll go to this table.
Well, we had some of the similar thoughts that these groups have had, and I guess maybe just to delve in, I was thinking, maybe if he could meet someone who had had an amputated foot to see what life could look like after that, or talk to somebody that had. I think people just think my life would be over and I couldn't function independently at all or whatever, so maybe that might be a thought to add to it. And maybe having someone other than the doctor talk to him that maybe he trusts more. Have the doctor explain to other people, a friend or family member, if you could locate one, that why is this time different than the other times with the infection, what about it is different. Really make sure he really grasps that it's not just like the other times. And I think that I find as a social worker that sometimes people, ask people, what's your biggest fear? Like maybe it is going to the nursing home, but maybe it's, I couldn't stay at my home, but I couldn't afford a nursing home. And they don't realize that there would be ways to maybe help cover an assisted living or a nursing home or Medicaid or something. Otherwise, I think we had similar thoughts and we feel like it's his right to decide ultimately.
Very good, thank you. This table, where did you come out? Were you basically the same as the other groups, or?
Doing some compromising with them, maybe see if there's some trial that we can try, and if that doesn't work, like, taking your meds properly, and doing the diet.
Right.
And if that doesn't work within so many months or days, then we'll try surgery then.
Right.
And then if that doesn't, then complications, we're on our way to the surgery.
Okay, good. So, let me tell you what we decided. Mr. Folgers was a street person. He didn't have a home. Whenever I do a case study, people always come up with things that I didn't think of, so I go back and I revise it, and I should have put that in. He was really on the street. He was a homeless person. He really liked his lifestyle. I mean, he didn't really want to change. He didn't want to take the meds or, test for his blood sugar or eat the right foods. He just really liked, he wanted to just be the way he was. He was really afraid of losing his leg or his foot because he was on the streets, and that would be a severe problem. And so he wanted to do anything to avoid losing a foot. And so we had this case where this was a person who was homeless. He had a known record of alcoholism and drug abuse. And it didn't seem to be, ultimately we went to, maybe I should just go back to that. Okay, so he didn't seem to be sufficiently comprehending how serious the surgeon felt that this was. The surgeon and the infectious disease guy were saying, this is going to spread rapidly and we need to act now. We can't postpone this. He didn't seem to be fully comprehending the severity of his situation. And so we used that as a basis to decide that he wasn't mentally competent. So therefore, that set aside, under this circumstance, patient autonomy. And then we went to the two principles of do no harm and do good. And do no harm would be to respect his autonomy. But like getting an injection for the flu shot, we felt that the beneficence principle worked better, or sort of took precedence over do no harm from his perspective, that the greater harm was his death. And that so therefore to do good would be to amputate the leg, because even though he wouldn't agree to the surgery, we felt that we had a psychologist who came in on the case, we felt that we had sufficient grounds to believe that he wasn't mentally competent, and therefore the principle of patient autonomy was set aside. So we had his leg was amputated in order to preserve his life. I don't know if that was the right thing, but that was sort of the way we worked through this particular issue.
You know how it came out afterwards? How he did afterwards?
He went back to his lifestyle, and eventually I moved away, and I don't know whatever happened to him. He wasn't really happy with
It seems like with an amputation, there is, well, like you said, you had a psychologist come in, you have to, because there's so much after that you have to deal with the patient, and people that are mentally with it, their everyday life, and they have like amputated and whatnot, they still have problems even with that years down the road, so.
Right.
Yeah.
The thing about ethics is it's always the gray areas. If it's black and white, it's not an ethical issue. And so, one of the things about, I think, being on that hospital ethics committee, or just thinking about this, is you have to just recognize you make the best decision you can, but knowing that it's not, somebody else may disagree with you or may have made a different
So then you
decision.
look at an amputee is the follow-up, the following up on his stump and, how he's going to get around and his mobility and it would be interesting to see, did you stop, did you put him in a nursing home afterwards, what did you do for follow-up?
We actually had a social worker work with him. We didn't get any more subsequent reports as an ethics committee. Okay, I'd like to just sort of move on, and I should tell you, LaGreer, my wife, she told me there was two things about today. She said there would be coffee here. And she said, if you run over, it's okay. So I'm going with that, it's okay, but because I'm getting a little behind, but let's, no, I'm fine now. I told LaGreer, I said, there's no coffee here, and you're gonna have to pay for that. And she goes, I'll go get you some coffee. I go, oh no, I'll think of something else you can do later. Okay, so I want to talk now about the relationship between quality healthcare and ethical healthcare and cultural and spiritual competence. So people from diverse racial and ethnic cultures are less likely to receive the same quality of care as those from the dominant culture. So in Nebraska, the dominant culture would be white Christian. Okay. And we know this statistically. There are all sorts of statistics that I could have put in, but I didn't. We know that the quality of care disparities span a broad range of services and healthcare settings. But the important thing to realize is that even though we have these disparities in the healthcare system, we're making good progress. We're doing better and better and providing the best possible healthcare for everyone, regardless of, you know, the ethnic or cultural or other differences that they may have. So we're making progress, but there's still more that we can do. And what I want to talk now about is sort of how to provide health care for individuals that is respectful of and accommodates cultural or spiritual differences. And so I want to give an example of what I'm talking about with the bioethical principle of autonomy. With the case study, we talked about autonomy, and you know, if you think about Mr. Folger's, the principle of autonomy became, it was the pivot principle. The way each of you tried to resolve this case is you went to autonomy, and all of the tables said, well, we need to respect this person's autonomy even if it means they're going to die. Which didn't make me feel great, because when I was on the committee, we decided we're going to set aside autonomy. We're going to just decide this person doesn't have good mental competency because we don't want to have this person just die. But you see how pivotal autonomy was in our ethical deliberations and thinking about this particular case study. Well, it turns out that in a lot of clinical ethics, autonomy is really crucial. But there are different considerations. First of all, the principle of autonomy sort of grows out of a Western individualistic cultural perspective. That's what we have in the United States. Okay? We tend to put a lot of emphasis on the individual person. It's the individual person who makes the decision about their body, correct? It's the individual person. We really value individual freedoms. In fact, it's written into the Bill of Rights. So, from our cultural perspective, one of the highest values is individual freedom. And that's why autonomy is so important. But it's important to understand that in other cultures, autonomy may be done differently. So in some cultures, the decision-making autonomy doesn't rest with the individual patient, it rests with somebody else. It can be the matriarch or patriarch of the whole family unit. And so you could have a patient who is going to, you know, if they have a really life or death type of situation that they need to decide, instead of the patient deciding, they'll defer to the matriarch or the patriarch of the family. Or the husband sometimes, as the head of the household, is the one who makes the decision, even if it's for a grown kid or for a spouse. You know, that person is, and that's recognized, okay? Or, you know, if you're like in some other country, it can be the village elder or elders who make those critical decisions. Are you with me?
Which would be the same as an ethics committee, really.
Could be.
I mean, a village elder board would be an ethics committee.
Yeah, but they wouldn't worry about autonomy. They would just decide what
But
was
they would have their things that they're using as their
right.
things to decide.
Exactly.
Isn't that still autonomy though, if the patient agrees with that?
Mhm.
They agree that the patriarch makes the decision and that is autonomy. Unless they
You
disagree.
take over from here.
Yeah.
No, that was going to be my next point. That sometimes in a clinical, I've seen this happen. I've trained people preparing for ministry and people preparing to be doctors, and in both of those settings, sometimes I've seen students who, you know, wanted to just insist that the patient has the autonomy, and they should be the person who makes the decision. But in actuality, the patient has the right to basically to say, no, I'm not going to make the decision. I'm going to give that authority to the matriarch or to the family or to my husband or my father. Okay? that's still respecting that patient's autonomy. It's just that that patient is choosing to exercise their autonomy in a different way than what we conventionally think of and what I'm going to say 95% of your other patients that you see, how they think about it. Does that make sense? So, so you can't force somebody to make their decision that's disrespecting their autonomy, in a sense.
You're talking adults, you're not talking children, because I know
Right.
in some other state there was a child that had leukemia and the parents said it was against the religion, wanted to do all this natural stuff, and I know they went to court, and parents lost, so the child got the life-saving therapy that
Right.
she needed.
Right. So minors and autonomy, that's what conventionally the way we think about it, and definitely the way the courts think about it. We don't attribute autonomy to someone who's under 18 years of age. We just have decided that is, where we're going to draw the line. It turns out that there's some 14-year-olds who are really pretty smart and, would be pretty good at autonomy, and there's some 54-year-olds who really aren't so smart. But we sort of agreed that autonomy is something that you receive when you turn 18 years old. So in a case like the one that you mentioned, where a child has leukemia and the parents, because of their religious beliefs, believe that they don't want to do any, pursue any sort of medical procedures, even though the standard of care would offer some options to this particular kid. So what we've sort of said on this issue is that the parents, in exercising their autonomy, have the right, because of their religious beliefs, to decline care. And the Jehovah's Witnesses, blood transfusions is another example of that. But the parents do not have the right to ascribe those religious beliefs to their child. The child has to choose for themselves whether they're going to follow that particular religion and have those particular beliefs. And so, until the child reaches the age of maturity at 18, and can say, yes, I want to follow the same religion as my parents, and I want to decline this treatment. Until then, we try to be neutral about that, and so we follow the best standard of care, which would in this case be giving the treatment to the child with leukemia, or giving the transfusion to a child who's growing up in a Jehovah's Witness family, and in which that's considered, that's not something to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's sort of, it gets messy.
Play out with Jehovah's Witnesses, you can be baptized when you're a kid. So would that rule out things? Because they chose that religion. Because with the Jehovah's Witnesses, you don't get baptized until you're ready and you actually want to be
So you,
that.
from the perspective of the law, I don't think it would, because the child chose to be baptized as a child and not with the age of where we attribute full autonomy. So it's really messy, because from a theological perspective, from Jehovah's Witness, the Witness faith, receiving a blood transfusion because of certain ways they interpret certain passages in the Bible, that sort of has eternal consequences. And so it's really messy. There's no good, ethics is always the gray, where there's different legitimate answers. And so in this case, we default this way. And I think partly as a society because of separation of church and state. So the state at that point becomes agnostic in terms of the religion and just tries to do what's in the best physical health for that child. Even though if the child grows up to become a Jehovah's Witness or in the other case, there are, there's sort of eternal consequences. So it's not easy when you take seriously the theology and the faith of, in this case, Jehovah's Witnesses. In this particular case, this is sort of a classic, ethics dilemma. What do you do? When I was teaching at medical school in Kansas City, we actually had Jehovah's Witness practitioner come in and speak to one of my ethics classes, and from him, I learned this sort of theological perspective and gained a much deeper appreciation for how difficult the situation is. But as a society, we've decided that you can't really decide until you're 18. Other questions or comments? How are we doing? Good? Okay, let's go on. I want to go to another case study. I'm going to have you read case study number 2 on mysterious lesions. This is much shorter. All the file case. All right, so let's come back together and just focus it all together as a larger group. So in this case, let me begin by asking, well, what do you think's going on? Well, he's sick, yeah. So what's up with these lesions? These sort of perfectly round lesions, sort of red burn-like things that are in different places of use.
Cigarette, but it's in big.
They try to treat it.
They try to treat it. So that would be different, right? How about over here? This,
I think it's pointing, which is a common treatment for, like, you see it, in Randolph, we saw it a lot with Vietnamese, Laos, Cambodian.
right.
But the parents know to lie about it, they know that it's not a very acceptable practice. So that's kind of a dynamic.
Okay. Can you say more about coining, what that?
Well, I guess, I don't know exactly how you go about doing it, but I know that it leaves a mark that would probably be similar in damage to like a hickey. Or what I'm interested in is that all the Olympic swimmers and athletes were doing that cupping, which you can see those marks on their skin in between. So some of these practices from Eastern ways are kind of
over here, this table was Googling it, so what did you come up with?
Well, I was just looking up the coining, and it says it's just kind of what the practice of rubbing the edge of a coin across warm, oiled skin as part of Southeast Asia Vietnamese folk therapy derived from the Chinese from treating migraines, fever, etc. Coin's skin has dark and linear rheumatoid microecchymosis, which simulate lesions of child or domestic abuse.
Right. Okay. So the reason I wanted, it was coining. That was what the parents were doing in this case. But, that's sort of a cultural thing, and it's not part of Nebraska culture. So if this child comes to your clinic and you see all of these red circles, these burn marks, what's your first conclusion? What's your first assumption? Child abuse. I would hope it would be child abuse. Because, you know, we need to look out for that. Those of us who are in, you know, caring professions, nurses or pastors, you know, I have a moral obligation. If I see a child in my congregation that I suspect child abuse, I have to report that. So the assumption would be this is child abuse. But in the Asian Southeastern culture, this is a form of care. It's a folk remedy that they may believe in, or that they do believe in, and that they're trying on their child. And but the parents are not being straight up with the person doing the interview, right? Because why? I'm sorry. In our culture, it would be abuse, but sort of think about that more. Why would they not be honest with you about these issues? Well, they may fear child abuse, but they may also fear what you'll do. Because one of the things we're not going to talk a lot about this morning, but there's a power dynamic between nurses and doctors and the patient. Okay? So sometimes we forget that because it's what you do every day. But patients may be afraid to even come to the clinic, particularly if there's these, a big cultural difference between their culture and the dominant Nebraska culture. So we have to be thoughtful of that, and that's one of the things we're talking about this morning. Okay, let me just move on then at this point to, this is another clinical case study. We'll just do this here, and I'll read it, and you tell me A, B, or 1, 2, 3, or 4. An unconscious man is brought to the emergency department for a motor vehicle accident, hemorrhagic, perfusive, hypertensive, and stuporous. No one knows the man. However, he's wearing a t-shirt that says, "Kiss me, I'm a Jehovah's Witness." What should be done about a blood transfusion for his condition? Do you give the patient blood? Do you wait for him to regain consciousness? Do you not give him a blood transfusion because he's a Jehovah's Witness, or do you wait for his family to arrive?
Give the patient blood.
Okay. All right, we'll take a vote. Those of you who think 4, raise your hand. Okay. 3, 2, 1. He's a Jehovah's Witness. Why are we not? You're exactly right. Exactly right. I threw this in. You know what this is? When I was teaching ethics to medical students, we had to write questions for their exams. And I put this question in for the exam, and you would not believe how many medical students chose 2, 3, or 4. I mean, they just really all thought that, but it's a trick question. So, I mean, and I shouldn't have done that to the students.
Well, first of all, it says no one knows the man, so how are you going to wait for family? Because if you don't know who he is, you don't know who to contact, and by then the guy's going to be dead. So.
Right.
Besides, everybody wears t-shirts that.
You just don't know about a t-shirt.
Because of his t-shirt.
He could be poor and somebody just gave him a t-shirt. Or his mother could be a Jehovah's Witness and he's just wearing a t-shirt. He was on his way to the family reunion just to make her happy. So, but that's an assumption, which leads me to what I want to talk about next, which is stereotyping. Stereotyping in the clinic setting. Now, stereotyping is the use of social categorizing to acquire and process and recall information about others. Okay? So we all stereotype, right? We all do stereotyping. It's a way you function socially, okay? So if you see me and I'm dressed as I am right now, you're going to assume that I'm probably middle class, right? I'm either going to church or I'm going for, I have I have to dress a certain way for my profession, so I might be, a certain type of profession. But, if I came in, if I come in this morning to do this presentation wearing bib overalls and a flannel shirt, that would have startled you, right? Because we do, well, maybe not this group, but I'm already. The point is that we use stereotyping, and sometimes it's pretty important. I mean, if somebody's threatening, that's sort of important, socially. And in practice, you make assumptions when you walk into the clinic to see a patient. You're going to carry some assumptions about them, right? So if you walk into an examination room and you see someone who's, in the last case study, who's Asian, okay, you're going to know that. You're going to maybe bring up a stereotype of Asians, and it may occur to you that the lesions on the child, that may be a full remedy because of your background in medicine, right? If you go in and it's a white kid with the same sort of lesions, you're not going to have that same stereotype. So sometimes stereotypes work for us. They help you in terms of practicing the caring profession, so to practice medicine. So sometimes you use the stereotypes to fill in gaps about patient information, especially when you got to see a lot of patients. When you're busy, we stereotype. But stereotyping can lead to misdiagnosis or the selection of certain treatment plans over others for the wrong reasons. And stereotyping can undermine a patient's trust if they get an idea that you've already decided who they are because you've made some sort of stereotype. Are you with me? So, what I want to do is to move into some models for how to provide culturally sensitive care for patients. And I don't know when they asked me to come and do this presentation if they thought that I would come in and say, here's what you need to know about Hispanic people, and here's what you need to know about Asian people, and here's what you need to know about other people who practice Islam, and here's what you need to know about Jewish people. I don't know. My wife was sort of vague in terms of what of that. But I can't do that, because those are all categories. And sometimes patients may be a particular culture or particular ethnicity or particular religion, but that doesn't mean you know that person just because you know they're Christian or they're Hispanic. So to give you an example, let's think about Christians. Okay, so Christians, when it comes to the question of abortion, and I'm thinking of all Christians. Some Christians think that abortion is wrong, that it's killing an innocent life. But there are other Christians who think that that's not so. They think that under certain circumstances, very reluctantly and sad, that abortion may be permitted. Okay, so you can't look at a Christian and say, well, that person's a Christian, therefore they're against abortion or they're for abortion, because there's differences. And even in situations where, say, the Catholic Church is very clear that abortion is wrong. But that doesn't mean that everybody who's Catholic necessarily holds that position on abortion. They may disagree. Which means that, we need to not get into the way of thinking of like, if I just know these 5 things about Hispanic people, then I can provide culturally sensitive care. Or if I know these type of things about Christians, then I can provide culturally sensitive care, because there's diversity within all of these groups. That's why. So instead of telling you all of these, this is what Christians believe, this is what Jews believe, this is what people from Southeast Asia believe, all I can do is really say, here's some ways to practice care in a way that is culturally sensitive and that helps you get the information you need in order to provide the best care possible. So this is from Arthur Kleinman, and this is sort of his approach to doing a patient interview. So he begins by saying, just what do you call your problem? So somebody's come in and they're having, headaches. And so you sit down and ask the person, well, what's the problem? Or what do you call your problem? And then you ask the person, well, what do you think caused the problem? So some patients may say, well, I think maybe I'm getting headaches because I keep getting sinus infections because I have allergies this time of year. But you may encounter a patient who says, well, I think I'm getting headaches because I think that one of my enemies has cast a spell on me. Okay? So that's important when you continue with providing care. What do you think? Why do you think it started when it did? Okay. And what does your sickness do to you? How does the sickness feel? So for some individuals, I might, this is to take myself, I got headaches, I'm like, well, it's keeping me from doing the work that I need to do. And it's keeping me from enjoying life the way I want to, enjoying, my kids, or taking my dog out. For somebody else, they may see this sickness in a more cosmic terms. Okay? So that's why you ask this question. And then there are more questions, as it turns out. How severe is your condition? How long do you think you will have this condition? And the fourth question to ask people is, what do you fear about these headaches? I talked about my backaches a little while ago, and the doctor asked me, well, why is this a concern to you? You're saying it's just sort of a nagging ache that hasn't kept you from doing anything. Why is it a concern to you? Other questions are, what are the chief problems that your sickness has caused? Do you know someone else with the same problem? What have you done so far to treat your illness? So if you've got a good relationship of trust with the patient, then maybe the patient will tell you, well, I'm doing some sort of home remedy. That's what I started with. And some home remedies come from different cultures. We talked already about hot cloths placed on skin to drive out the fever or the illness. Okay, I'll tell you that if I think I've got a cold coming on, here's my home remedy. I fix myself a big bowl of tuna salad. And it's my special tuna salad that is 1 part tuna and 4 parts onions. Right? I'm convinced that helps. It's my home remedy that I came up with by myself. Laverne never eats that, the tuna, and she's like, you have to eat all of it. So that's so if I presented, I said, I'm really fighting this cold, I'm really sick, and my doc said, well, what have you done? I would go, well, I made my famous tuna salad, but it didn't work. So here I am, give me a magic drug. What results do you hope to obtain from the treatment? Again, that goes back to the farm model, right? What are the assumptions you're making? And then who else can or is helping you? So maybe there's somebody else who's a practitioner, particularly of a faith, who may be providing some sort of help that you want to know. Does this seem helpful in terms of, I don't know anybody who's memorized these particular specific questions, but you know, it sort of gives you an idea of how to proceed with an interview. Okay. Let's go on. A couple of mnemonics for cultural competency. This is from Berlin and Quotes. And this is called the learn mnemonic. So it's like the farm mnemonic that we talked about earlier, only now we're focusing not on ethics but on cultural competency or understanding the cultural uniqueness of a particular patient. And so you need to remember the word learn, L-E-A-R-N. And the L stands for listen to the patient's perspective of the problem. So ask the patient, what do you think's going on? What's your perspective? Okay. E is to explain from a medical perspective, you know, the medical sort of take on what's going on. Okay. A is to acknowledge and discuss the differences and similarities between the patient's perspective and the practitioner's perspective. And then R is to recommend treatment, and then N is to negotiate treatment. Now, one of the things in that first case study I thought was really good is a couple of tables were trying to figure out how to negotiate with Mr. Folgers to try to, you know, get him moving to accepting surgery. So sometimes it's about negotiating treatment. Just to give myself as an example, a while ago my doctor thought that I should stop drinking so much coffee because I had acid reflux, so don't stop drinking. The way she says, you need to stop drinking coffee, you need to stop drinking tea, you need to stay away from red sauces, like, you know, spaghetti sauce. You need to not eat certain citrus fruits like oranges and bananas. I'm still trying to figure that one out. And what else did she say? Well, that's enough. I said, you're crazy. I live on coffee, you know. When she said no coffee, I thought, okay, I have to switch to tea. The next words out of her mouth were no tea. I'm like, that's crazy. You know, that's not happening. You know, in the winter, my favorite fruits are oranges and tangerines and you know, all of those citrus fruits. I hate it. She said, well, what about apples? I don't really like apples. I know an apple a day keeps the doctor away, but I'm sorry. I just don't like apples. So we negotiated, okay? And so she said, would you cut back? I said, I can cut back. So instead of drinking a pot of coffee in the office each morning, I cut back to 1 cup. I got better. But that's just sort of trying to explain what I mean by negotiate treatment. This is called the FICA mnemonic, and this is for spiritual competency. And so when you're encountering a patient you're not sure about, just to ask them, what is their faith? What is your faith tradition? So tell me about your faith. Tell me about what it means to be a Zen Buddhist. Or tell me about, you know, being a Hindu or a Wiccan. Okay? How important is your faith to you in your life? For some people, their faith is very, very important. It's a central thing in their lives, and for other people, they sort of want that faith is a part of their life, but you know, it's not central in the same way it was for the first person. What about your spiritual community? Where do you go for spiritual support? Is it a church? Is it a mosque? Maybe you don't have a spiritual community. Ask about how your beliefs apply to your health. And then, as a physician or a practitioner, how can I address your spiritual needs? Okay, so I've thrown out a couple of these mnemonics. So this is called FICA. The other one was learn, and then there was Kleiman's questions. That can be complicated, it can be hard to remember those. And so the last thing is just the simple question approach, which is to just simply ask, do you have any spiritual needs or concerns related to your health? As your physician or nurse, is there anything that I can do to facilitate spiritual care, such as contacting a spiritual care provider? Hospitals have chaplains, but a lot of times individuals have somebody that's their spiritual director, their spiritual guide. It can be a pastor, a priest, or some other imam or some other rabbi. So, questions about what I presented? I sort of rushed through a couple of mnemonics. Is this helpful? Be honest. I gave you the slides, so maybe you want to just sort of blow up or put some of these mnemonics up someplace to help you remember, or to help staff just sort of think about these types of things. So to remember what tharm means, and just sort of to keep that in mind. Okay, you've gotten all quiet.
I want to ask a question out of
Great.
curiosity.
Yes.
We all work in the medical field. So I'm just curious, if you guys will be honest, how many of you have had a cold or some other condition and taken, searched through your medicine cabinets and taken medicine that was prescribed to another family member or was from another illness you had earlier, and tried that first before you went into the doctor? I mean, I'll raise my hand. Okay, now my next question is, when they've asked you, what have you tried so far, how many people in here have not been completely honest about that? Have you always told the doctor everything you've tried when you've done that?
Because he knows me.
See, I thought we were not.
I know I don't.
I'll start with, I know it bad,
I'm
but
gonna admit.
I always tell my mom.
I think we try things sometimes that we are too embarrassed to admit to the doctor that we've
Absolutely.
already tried. Even if we go out.
Sometimes it's not a major thing. You sort of go to the doctor's the last one.
Going back to the kids, we have a lady that comes in with, her babies, and wants immunizations, but she only wants one shot at a time. So can we outmaneuver them and give them to her?
So she's committed to the vaccinations. But she only wants them one at a time? Does that mean she just keeps coming back instead of taking them
To
all?
me, it's more fun, because now they're older and they don't like, they're scared to come in.
Right.
It's just like, get them there and over.
I don't know that you can just give them all to the kid. I wouldn't advise that.
Oh, no, we're not, I was just going by that, you said.
A lot of care, health care is education. And, sometimes you have gold star students and sometimes you don't.
She's just
And-
afraid that, I believe, she doesn't know which one will affect the case, so that's why she just does one at a time, so she.
So she's conducting experiments on her kids, right? I think that's just a matter of education. And, I've served on hospital ethics committees, and most of the cases that we got, they didn't involve ethical decision-making like Mr. Folger's. A lot of times it meant there's been a standoff between the nurses and the doctors and the patient, or the patient and the patient's family, and the hospital ethics committee's job is to sort of come in and educate and reconcile so that they can move forward with treatment. So I think that sometimes we underestimate how much of a role education is in the healthcare profession for nurses and for
I don't know how much education physicians actually did, we just said, yes, fine.
I think we also have to remember we live in a country of freedom.
right.
We are people that are free to make choices. We're not, living in
countries that are telling us that we have to do certain things. And I think education is huge, but it's still ultimately up to that person. And I think, thank God, we live in America where we're free to choose if we want to have treatment or not treatment, or immunizations or not.
Right, I totally agree with that, yeah. I think in terms of the children, I mean, we've been talking about this with the transfusion. Where we sort of draw a line as a society is we sort of override the parent if it's a life and death pattern. But if it's something like, vaccinations, we give the parent the autonomy to choose what's best for their child. So, but the thing that's sort of the trump card that overrides parental autonomy is if it's clearly a life and death situation. Okay. Any other comments? Well, I want to do one more case study before, I don't know, what we're going to eat. Okay, so I want you to case study 4. Let's do number 4, the reluctant patient. And then if we have time, we can come back to 3 if you like. Since that we sort of squeezed the fun out of case study number 4, let's go. I'd like to go around to each table. Just I'm going to call on your spokesperson, and I'll start over here. So, how did you resolve this or think about this case? If you could stand and just sort of. I'm sorry.
Just thought maybe we should find out why they are scared of our medication. And then I also said, well, their stuff isn't working, so why don't you try ours?
Don't sit down. That's a great answer, but how are you going to do that?
What, ask them questions? He said that.
How are you going to get her to tell you?
Well, the daughter.
Okay, so the daughter can give you some information. You've got to do better than that.
To find out why she's scared of our medicine.
Yeah.
And understand if a friend passed away from taking it, or
Okay.
give the details of why she's so scared of taking ours.
Okay. Who wants to go next? Okay, over here. You almost stood up, so I saw you on the corner of my eyes.
Research, you could Google it.
How close to Google table?
And find out exactly what she's afraid of through the daughter, or if you find that you feel the daughter's holding back too, maybe just an unbiased translator. What their beliefs are, what kind of treatment is okay and what is not, and see if you can find out what those several friends in Sudan, what was the treatment, and maybe explain them. And if somebody gave them Tylenol for a fever, try to educate them that that was a wise choice, and whatever the treatment was. Understanding, reassure them. Let them know that whatever the treatment they're going to have is going to be discussed with them first, and that it's their choice. That whatever they can do something. What else?
Thank you. I'll go with next.
We just thought, really, well, we looked at it 2 different ways. First, through the daughter, getting information from her, and her mother, plus the daughter, so go that route. But also, in Lexington, we have 2 full-time interpreters. So in that way, I was thinking, you just have to really educate. You have to get the patient to trust you. And then after that, like she was saying, the first visit, you don't even know if you do anything, just visit, just find out why, what happened, you know, and after that, getting them back, but in our clinic, getting them to trust you is huge. Things. Yeah.
Nicely done,
All about
thank you.
trust, I agree.
I'll come to the center table, the head table.
We all discussed, what everybody else has said, ask more questions, find out what is scaring her about modern medicine, what had happened to her friends that influenced her decision for this. Using daughter as an example, since she's been here longer than her mom has, the daughter could help us by, telling her, modern medicine has, helped keep me healthy, it's gonna help get you healthy, and, things like that. Find out what the bad experiences were, and, with them, that's really our trust is.
Great, thank you. So all the tables are asking the right questions. But in this particular case, at least the way I conceived of it, the key is to get the mother to start sharing. Right? So you know the context. She's had some toes amputated, that she's concerned about her English, she's diabetic, etc. So how do you overcome those barriers in order to really be able to help this person? And so the trust, I think, is that's really important. You got to gain her trust really before you ask her questions or educate her. So be able to just talk about, medicine, and I think here this table talked about the importance of sharing sort of the ground rules of Western medicine, particularly with regard to autonomy. How we're not going to make you do anything. This is sort of we're going to respect your autonomy. But fundamentally, it's to the fundamental move you have to make with this patient is to gain their trust, and they're coming in suspicious of you already. And so it's going to be a hard one, but you do have the ally in terms of the daughter who's got the mother here finally. And so I like the idea of just sitting and talking the first time. And sometimes I think nurses and doctors, they have a lot to do. And there's a lot of paperwork in addition to all of that. And sometimes, I come in, what's the problem, how can I help you, then I got to move to the next room. In this particular case, beginning by asking questions may not be, that's not going to build trust. First, I think some time is going to have to be invested in terms of just sitting and talking and listening to what's going on, and asking questions that aren't designed necessarily to get you the information that you need, but to open the mom up so that she begins to share. You begin to understand why all of her friends say, "Oh, don't go to a doctor." To begin to understand those perspectives, and then in that way counter that or respond to that, and that's the way that you can build up trust in this situation. So this was the hardest case study of them all, I thought. I intended for them to do. Case study number 3, I'm not going to do it here because our banquet is ready, and we have our server who's ready to go and give us our food. The third case, you might want to read it, on the ride home, not if you're driving, of course, but the third case is sort of how not to do cultural sensitivity. So you can just read it, and then the idea was, think of all the different ways the doctor made mistakes in this case. Okay, I'll look at it in that sense. Some final advice. I don't think of these mnemonics as recipes that have to be followed strictly in the precise order, but think of them as mental reminders of things that you need to incorporate as you're providing care. Don't think in terms of silos, but think in terms of a team who can help you. Know and respect your limits and your role as a nurse or as an administrator. And then here's a suggestion: if your practice has a particularly large ethnic group that you're seeing, then consider seeking out who are the leaders of this group. Is it a particular religious leader? Is it somebody that's just recognized in that community as sort of someone that they turn to for advice because of their wisdom, or because of their success, or because they're a spiritual leader? And invite that person to come and sit down and just get to know them, and have them share with you how you can provide care that's going to be appropriate for that particular culture and that particular perspective. It would be an investment of time, but I think it would be a good investment. And then if you gain the trust of those community leaders, that's going to spread out into all of your patients too. If you have a particular community and say they all go to a particular church, and you can talk to that pastor, then the pastor in dealing with the parishioner who is having health issues can be able to say, hey, I've gone to this clinic, I know the coordinator, I've spoken with them, you can trust them, you should go, and I'll go with you. A good pastor will always say, I'll go with you if you're afraid. And then you build up some connections which will help you provide better care. Final questions or anything else before we close out? Well, I hope that that I've been able to be of some help, and wish you well your practices.